hitting prospects to target for redraft. And so what we did is we put together a little mock draft. We mocked last night, and we're going to talk about those players. But first, we'll go around and introduce ourselves. First, I am joined by Brian Walton. Brian is the owner and operator of the CardinalNation.com and a partner at Creative Sports. Brian, how are you today?
I'm doing great, Chris. It's a pleasure to be here. Hopefully everybody can hear me okay because I don't have a professional mic. On the other hand, that's the beach and the Atlantic Ocean.
Best background.
I'm already in Florida at spring training, so I got that going for me.
Yes, that definitely beats sitting in a office or a basement or cold weather. I will gladly take your audio from the background. And we've got Geoff Pontes from Baseball America. Geoff, how are you?
Appreciate you saying my name is one syllable as opposed to two. We're gonna have to take that up with Nick after the show. But it's not like I'm new to the space. People haven't been saying my name for a while. But yeah.
All right, and I'm Chris Clegg of the DynastyDugout.com. We are going to go through our draft picks. We drafted 24 hitting prospects to target for redraft leagues. We snaked the draft. I randomized the order. Geoff got the first pick. Brian got the second pick, and I got the third pick. So we're just going to go through and talk about these hitting prospects. We're happy to answer any questions you have on any of these players as well. But Geoff, kick us off. Who did you draft first? Who is the hitting prospect that you will take at the top? Because you tried to take Roki before you realized that it was a hitter draft.
I mistook it, and of course, in the year of the pitcher, we're doing the redraft hitter thing, and it's funny because it is a year where unusually there's a lot of pitchers that could potentially debut and have impact. We're kind of coming off a little bit of the hangover of the Paul Skeens mania of last year, but also Jared Jones and some other guys, and I think the environment in AAA. Which is how hard it was for pitchers with those auto zones, I think prepared them a lot more with the hitters. And I think it's kind of done the opposite for the hitters. But in terms of who I took number one, I think there's a lot of good names up here at the top. I'd say the top like 5 or 6 all could be pretty impactful. I went with Christian Campbell from the Red Sox. I think there's a clear opportunity for him to take the second base job. They've been pretty vocal about him going back to last spring training. The feedback only gets louder and louder. Of course, he delivered on a lot of that promise and a lot of the smoke that was coming out when we were out in Florida last year, Chris, and the things that we were hearing just from the Red Sox folks and guys around camp. What we've heard is he's added another 15 pounds of muscle, was the most outstanding guy in their offseason hitting camps. That's why they didn't send a lot of guys to AFL, because they had their big hitters down there in Fort Myers hitting and sort of working with their hitting development team, which has done a phenomenal job in terms of, optimizing a lot of the hitters in that organization. The other thing is they came out a couple weeks ago and said that he will be competing for a job in spring training. And then, he was, of course, a non-roster invitee. I think there's an opportunity for him to be up really, really early. I think more so than Roman Anthony, who could also have a shot, but just it's a little tougher sledding. There's obviously a deeper positional group in the outfield for the Red Sox and guys that have major league experience, contracts, some all-stars, etc. So I feel like Campbell probably is going to be the guy they're going to use to target that PPI pick. Just how they operate, that they're going to value that quite a bit, and just the immense value they get out of additional slot money, even beyond the pick itself. And, the draft a couple years from now, it looks like it could be pretty good. So Campbell was my number one pick. There definitely were other considerations, though.
Geoff, what do you think about, is there going to be Super 2 management this year in terms of holding back guys until they can get below that service time guideline?
I think what we're seeing over the last couple of years since, the new CBA and the PPI introduction is that the teams value that. There aren't a lot of teams, particularly those that are in competitive marketplaces. Boston is a place that is dying to have a good team again. I think it's different than Pittsburgh. The ownership's focus is different than Pittsburgh. This rebuild's kind of gone on long enough. So I think that we will maybe see it in particular spots, but more often than not, I think a lot of these guys, that are top rookie names, particularly on the hitter side, have already debuted, or guys that, have opportunity to come up and potentially play. I just think there's so much value in adding that additional bonus money in terms of how you can move that money around the board and just kind of understanding how the draft works. The bonus pool dollars are even more important than the actual pick slot very often. So, you can get creative and just maybe even pull a guy from the mid first round down into one of those, competitive balance rounds or compensation rounds.
Yeah, it's like $3 million right now. It's
it's a good chunk of money.
Yeah, that's substantial addition. We saw what the Mariners did with it 2 years ago, where they were able to pull 3 pretty talented prep guys with those picks. So certainly pays off. All right, Brian, number 2 pick.
Yeah, and we're talking about one of the top prospects in baseball in Dylan Cruz. Certainly one of the guys who made his debut last year, but before he came up in his first full season, the guy stole 25 bases out of 30 opportunities. And he didn't set the world on fire with Washington, but he stole a dozen bases in 31 games. I think, although defensive prowess doesn't play in fantasy baseball, obviously, Cruz being a plus defender helps ensure that he's going to get to play and that he'll be given the time necessary to adapt. He had a 218 average, 641 OPS when he first came up for the Nationals at the end of last year, but he also had an 8.3% walk rate, 9 extra base hits. So it isn't like he was doing poorly. Defensively, 90th percentile. I'm sorry, 90th percentile on his exit velocity, I should say, which says that he's got the skills. He makes contact. Doesn't necessarily elevate the ball as much as the Nationals would like. So that's something I'd like to see Dylan Cruz to do more. But the guy has opportunity, and it looks like he's going to slot second in the Nationals lineup. And so that's an opportunity. Obviously, he's going to get a lot of plate appearances. And I think Cruz is a very, very safe pick in terms, if you want to talk about a safe pick for a prospect hitter in a redraft league this year, because he's on a team that's going to give him the chance to play. And as I said, I think his defense will keep him in the lineup, even if his offense lags a bit.
Yeah, no, I mean, everybody kind of talked about Cruz coming out of LSU like he didn't run. He didn't need to run in that LSU lineup, but he's definitely going to have the free reins in Washington. I think he's going to steal a lot of bags and certainly provide power. So I snaked at 3 and 4. So this was a tough spot. I debated a couple of guys here because I think that, those probably are my top 2 picks. And I went with Jason Dominguez and Matt Shaw, just looking at guys that I think are going to contribute from opening day. Debated Roman Anthony. I think Anthony's path to playing time is tough in Boston with the outfield situation. I think it's probably like a June call up, maybe late May. So that's kind of why I avoided there. But Dominguez is interesting. He's kind of got the prospect fatigue label. He didn't play much last year. He's kind of sit on the roster. Everybody's kind of like, oh, like this guy must suck if Alex Verdugo's playing over him. But it's got to remember that Dominguez was coming off injury, and they were in the middle of a World Series run. Like, for a young, inexperienced player, like, it's a tough spot to be in. Now, I know Dominguez, there's been some questions this offseason about, the body. There's some progression, like, did he take a step back in several different areas? But we are talking about somebody who put up pretty elite exit velocities last year in the minors. He had a 90th percentile EV near 108, which is pretty strong there. Contact skills are relatively good too. I think people don't give him as much credit there. While he is aggressive and he chases a bit, contact skills are still pretty solid. I mean, he ran a in-zone contact rate in the upper 80% range, which is really good. So with Dominguez, he's not going to be a center fielder. Obviously, Bellinger's playing there. He's going to get a spot out and left. I think he's going to hit. I think this is the year we see that really transpire. And then obviously with Matt Shaw, like, Shaw's profile is not flashy by any means, but it's just like 55s across the board, maybe a couple 6s there. It's a good field to hit. He's got some power and he's going to run. Now, you look at the numbers last year, they were really good, but post All-Star break last year, Shaw slashed 335, 417, 585, 11 homers, 23 extra base hits, 15% strikeout rate. Exit velocities are good too. 105, 90th, just north of there, and then a 91 mile an hour average EV. Those things will absolutely play with Shaw. He gets the ball in the air often enough for it to work. I'd like to see him pull the ball a bit more, but it's just a well-rounded profile, and he seems like he's going to be the Cubs' opening day third baseman. So you get production from the gate, which is huge, and I think that his floor is just high enough where there shouldn't be a huge transition period to the majors, where I think Shaw's just going to be really solid from the get-go.
Yeah, I really like Shaw. I would have taken him in the second round had I had a chance.
All right, Brian, 5th pick. You took the guy I was also debating, but who is that?
Yeah, we've already talked a little bit about Roman Anthony, but stepping back, a 20-year-old who played at AA, AAA, 982 OPS at AA, 894 at AAA, a guy with 30 home run, 30 stolen base potential. The only question with Roman Anthony, as has already been touched on, is how soon will Boston bring him in? He only has 35 games at AAA. So it's not like he's dying on the vine. But you look at the outfield, Duran, Rafaela, Wilyer Abreu. I think it might come sooner than midseason, and that's what I'm leaning into here. But, I mean, even if he only got 300 plate appearances or 250 plate appearances, a guy who can hit 30 home runs and steal 30 in a season, that's not a bad take his first year. And, best hit tool, according to Pipeline, at least, in their survey of MLB executives, I'm interested in what others think, but a 65 hit tool is a guy that I want on my roster anytime.
Yeah, it's good. It's good bat to ball skills. It's good swing decisions. I think like Jacob Wilson, if you're just talking pure hit tool, probably there. If you're going to bring in like launch ankle, distribution and some of those things, there might be some other guys. I think the biggest thing with Anthony is just optimizing his hard contact to his pull side. Started to do that more later in the year. Certainly something that the team had worked on when I chatted with Roman. I'm local to Worcester, about 15 minutes down the road from the park, so was there quite a bit at the end of the year doing. And he was our, Christian Campbell's our minor league player of the year, and at the time prior to Sasaki signing, Roman Anthony was the number one prospect in the game. So did a lot of coverage on him. Really, really smart kid, hard worker, loves to hit. Loves to get better. So I think sky's the limit with a player like that for sure.
Only question is timing.
Exactly. So we'll see. We'll see what the timing is.
If only O'Neill had stayed there, I figured his chance would have come a lot quicker because O'Neill's always hurt. But we'll have to see about the guys that are there this year.
Exactly. All right, I think it's back over to me now.
Yep, 2 picks
for the next 2 picks. I had I took a little bit of a chance here. Actually, the 2 picks that I took, maybe even took them out of order. I might have taken Dalton Rushing before Emmanuel Rodriguez. I'll explain Emmanuel Rodriguez. He's already been on the 40-man roster for a full year, which means they had to burn an option on him. I don't think they're going to want to do that too many more times. Did get up to AAA. The biggest issue with Emmanuel Rodriguez has been health. He hasn't been on the field nearly enough over the last couple of years, has dealt with some injuries, did have an off-season thumb surgery. But when you look at the player, he's really, really unusual. Just to throw some numbers at you in terms of his. Now, granted, this was 87, balls in play. He did only play about 40 games last year. Got up to AAA. It's a 423 xWOBA. It's some of the best quality of contact in the minor leagues. 110.1 90th percentile exit velocity. That's consistent with everything he's done over the last 2 years. It's some of the best raw power in the game. He's not the biggest guy, but I mean, it's 70 grade bat speed. It's 70 grade decisions. And probably about that, when I look at sort of ball flight, we do have some metrics and a model that actually looks at bat speed, looks at contact, it looks at decisions, it looks at ball flight. I didn't mention contact because that is the one part of Emmanuel Rodriguez's game, which is a major question mark. Now, he does sort of mitigate some of that risk because you're looking at a 9.5% chase rate, which is absurd, with a 31.9% swing rate. Now, it's a 22.4% chase minus swing. He's not as passive as you think. It's just he does not chase almost ever, which mitigates some of that risk. You are talking about a guy who misses 23 to 25% of the time in terms of in-zone miss. It might be around the range that he needs to be. Is he going to hit for a ton of average in fantasy baseball? Probably not. If you're an OBP guy, I think absolutely this boosts his value a ton. And there is true 30 home run, maybe 40 home run potential here. He is a guy that elevates his hard contact consistently and can hit the ball out to any part of the ballpark. There's speed as well. And he's actually a really good center field defender. I think people don't kind of miss that when they look at the profile. So really there's just one missing link here that if you can even get the contact up to like a fringe average rate in zone, could really, really take off. I think the sky's the limit. Doing some offseason work for our top 100 and our handbook lists. Manuel Rodriguez, in terms of a lot of teams' internal models, is a top 5 prospect. So I think he's really interesting. I also think that once you get to this point, you are taking, some risks, the sort of easy, low-hanging fruit in terms of who's going to be a productive, rookie hitter this year. Those guys are kind of off the board. My second pick, Dalton Rushing, I think just sort of across the board has one of the better, underlying database profiles in the game. Another guy with excellent quality of contact, 417 xWOBA, 16.6% in-zone miss to an 18.6% chase, 44% swing rate. He's not passive at all. It's a 25.8 chase minus swing, which is great. 80% heart swing. his 90th percentile exit velocity, and a lot of this number and this data was, on not only TrackMan devices at AA, but of course, Hawkeye devices at AAA, which we trust those numbers even more. 106.1 90th percentile, 111 max, 61% line drive plus fly ball rate, 34% air pull, 50% hard hit rate. I mean, just across the board, he does a lot of things well. The question with rushing, and this has been the case since I saw him in the Cape as an underclassman, is where is he going to play defensively? Might catch a few games, enough to maybe keep catcher eligibility in a pinch. I think ultimately he's going to end up playing a corner outfield spot. It's just a matter of, can he sort of hit his way and force his way into the conversation in the Dodgers outfield, which is obviously, this is one of the most talented teams we've seen over the last probably 30, 40 years. So that's no easy task. But I do think eventually he's going to break through either there or through a trade. So two guys that I taken some chances on. There's certainly some questions, but I think at this point, all these hitters have questions.
Rushing might have the best quality of contact since he debuted of any hitter in the minors. Like, it's got to be up there because he's consistent. Yeah. Like, since he debuted, just absurd across the board. I love
another
Rushing.
guy with crazy bat speed. I like guys with power and tools.
Yeah.
How can they block him? I mean, I know the guy's on the roster. It's a very talented roster, but you're talking about an elite hitter here.
Yeah, and I think that's the question. It's such a crowded 40-man roster that, they're kind of just up against it in terms of who are they going to have to DFA. There might be some folks that they can pull that out with. And I do think when you sort of look at this outfield, there's some older players there. There's some questions, guys that could potentially get hurt or need games off. We'll see. Or, maybe he's a guy that plays some catcher, plays some first base, plays some corner outfield when they need him to.
Yeah. He's not Rule 5 eligible till next offseason. I'd expect him to fully debut and be on the 40, but that certainly plays, and that 40-man roster is tight. Like, they're gonna have to cut some good players off of it. I mean, it's the reality of it. So it's
I mean, if he has a clear spot and he's in the 40-man roster, I don't think he's available at this pick for me.
Yeah, I agree. All right, Brian, you had the 8th pick. Who'd you take?
Well, let's draw back 12 months. Jordan Lawler would have been a pick that everybody was on top of last year at this time. Then he, of course, right after everybody drafted him, he had to undergo surgery for a torn ligament in his thumb, and ended up, almost as soon as he got back, he hurt his hamstring, and really, didn't get to play. Got back in rehab games, got hurt again, and so he only got 85 at bats in the regular season. And a lot of folks, myself included, thought maybe they'd send him down to the fall league again. Instead, they didn't. They sent him to the Dominican Winter League. He played for Lice and got off to a good start, but then slowed down in 27 games, 237 average, 315 OBP. But I thought what was most interesting, perhaps, about Jordan Lawler's time in winter ball was the fact that he played predominantly second base, third base, not short. And so what that tells me is that the Diamondbacks, want to try to find a way to get him onto the roster if they can, and maybe he plays a super utility role initially. Gerardo Perdomo's the shortstop, Marte's at second, but Marte's now 31, 32. So maybe he takes, rests a little more often or goes to DH. I thought maybe first base might provide some opportunity to shuffle guys around, but they brought in Naylor after Christian Walker left. So, but the DH is not clear right this time. Projected DH is maybe Pavin Smith. So, that shouldn't be impossible for Lawler to push out of the way if he gets the playing time, if he produces, and if he's healthy. And that's, of course, the biggest question about him right now.
Yep, that health has certainly been an issue with Jordan Lawler. No denying the talent, but got to stay on the field. So,
I mean, 83 steals and 97 attempts in the minors, 30 foot per second sprint speed, which I understand is, one of the best in the game. But, if you blow out your hamstring when you sprint first, it's not so good.
I almost wonder about them moving Suarez to DH and, potentially fit in there at third base. And they have a really athletic left side of the infield, teaming him up with Perdomo, and that could pay dividends. Or they can maybe, depending upon Marte's arm, they could maybe move Marte to third base too, have those guys in the middle of the infield. He's an athletic guy, moves around pretty well. There's good underlying skills. He's just kind of not had a healthy run for quite a bit now.
And his arm's good enough for the left side, right, Geoff?
Yeah, I think absolutely. He made all the throws at shortstop. That's not a question. And that's why I kind of wondered if they stuck with Perdomo, if, perhaps they say, hey, Smith is really more of a platoon guy, maybe a bench bat. We can use him in a few different spots, give guys rest. He fits better in at that role. And, we don't get overexposed, and Suarez is a bat and just keeps on hitting, and we get the 25 to 30 home runs out of the DH spot.
That scenario seems plausible to me.
Yeah. Don't disagree a bit. I had picks 9 and 10, so it really opens up here, and you're taking a lot of risks. So I took a big swing on Christian Moore, the Angels, who they just drafted last summer. Now we know the Angels get hyper aggressive with their prospects, and Moore certainly looked to be on the fast track last year. Played 2 games in single A after being drafted, sent to double A because they don't send any legit prospect to high A there. They just skip them straight to double A, Rocket City, and Moore continued to mash. Now there were some more strikeout issues that showed up, but talking about somebody that hit 34 home runs at Tennessee last year, put up some pretty gaudy exit velocity numbers as well. Moore was one of the biggest improvers of contact rates in college baseball from 2023 to 2024. He saw a jump from 65% overall and 75% end zone in 2023 up to 77% overall and 83% end zone last year. My question is it sustainable? I hope so. We did see some concerning numbers, I think, in pro ball at times with the swing and miss. But given the power that Moore's going to play at second base, and his approach is pretty solid. I think he's going to take a walk too. So, who knows with the Angels? I don't think he's up on opening day. I think it's probably more May, early June call-up time. But again, you never know how aggressive they want to get with their guys. We've seen them push all of their hitters super aggressively, most recently like Nolan Shanuel, obviously coming up during his draft year and being the minors very little. But Moore, the power could play at second base. Like that could be one of the better power bats among fantasy second basemen, which is pretty enticing. The exit velocities were off the charts. He had a 112 mile an hour 9th percentile with metal in college, which is just stupid. Like that was like 100th percentile among college hitters, and a 96 mile an hour average EV. So really good skills there. And with my next pick, I took Kobe Mayo, which is a massive risk. And I acknowledge that, given that there's not many spots in Baltimore. We've seen them kind of slow play their prospects. Mayo came up last year. He got 40 plate appearances and struggled. People have written him off really quick, which kind of surprises me. But again, we're talking about a player who has shown everything you want to see. Mayo has consistently improved in the power. He's always been a big power hitter, but the contact skills also, the improvements there have been quite notable. Last year was a 72% overall, which is closer to average and 83% end zone. But that'll absolutely play when you have the power that Kobe Mayo does. He mashes fastballs. He had a 725 slug against fastballs last year, which is crazy. And he had an average exit velocity of 95 on those pitch types. Now, there are some concerns against breaking balls. He hit 219 with a 40% whiff rate against sliders. So something to watch out for. But I believe in Mayo's profile still. He's be 23 on opening day. He's got the power. He's got a good enough feel to hit. Sure, he's probably not up on opening day. I think that's clear at this point. How many plate appearances does he get? I don't know. My hope is he's traded if they're going to continue to put him in AAA. But I'm still a believer in Kobe Mayo. I see no reason to jump off the bandwagon after 46 rough plate appearances in the majors when the Orioles are in the midst of a playoff run and Mayo's kind of thrown in a tough spot. So I'm still in on the bat. Just how much does he play this year? I don't know.
All right. Well, continuing on that Baltimore theme, I went with Heston Kjerstad, and you don't draft many 25-year-olds in this kind of draft, but I think we know the potential that he has. And when he came up, it was June and July, 14 games, hit like 378, 1141 OPS. Looked like he was on his way, and then the concussion ended his year. And again, this is all at this point about playing time. And he's going to have a spot in the major league roster. Will he be a platoon DH, or will he be able to get time in the outfield? And it looked pretty good when they let Santander go until they, of course, brought in Tyler O'Neill. And, you got Cedric Mullins and then Mateo / Dylan Carlson maybe in center. But again, they still have the DH. And so I think, there's an opportunity for Kjerstad. And, if he can be healthy, again, he is a guy who had health problems in the past, including hamstring and others. But he doesn't really have anything to prove in AAA at this point. He's been, tremendously successful there for some time. And the Orioles have got to like his power. And I think if he can stay healthy, Kjerstad will find a way to get 400-ish plate appearances this year. At least that's my bet when I took him in the 4th round.
Geoff, back to you, 12 and 13.
Yeah, so a couple of personal favorites of mine here. First one that I took is another FYPD guy. It's funny, I would love to take Travis Bazzana here. I just don't know there might be a path to playing time early this season. They certainly have some questions about that second base job. Do think he'll probably spend some time in AA and then AAA before they force him up. Somebody that I just don't think they have to push a ton, but certainly could come. That said, though I would take Bazzana over Nick Kurtz in an FYPD, I went with Nick Kurtz here. I think when you look at the Athletics, the situation that they're in, you look at they have, Tyler Soderstrom sort of listed as their first baseman. When I look at just the talent in the organization, I think the best first baseman at this point in time is Nick Kurtz. Kind of an outlier athlete for a first baseman. He's dealt with a lot of health and injuries, particularly in the off seasons. He hasn't played any summer ball while he was in college. Was always sort of dealing with something here or there. So that's kind of a question mark. Can he stay healthy for a full season? When we look at the skills, great underlying power, excellent bat to ball skills, really strong swing decisions. He runs pretty well for a first baseman as well, and is a good defensive first baseman. I just think, as a non-roster invitee, maybe he's not up right away. Maybe it is more like May or June, and they kind of super to him a little bit, as you talked about the top of the show. He could maybe be a candidate for that, but there's no reason to rush a guy that was just picked. We did see him get up to AA. They did get him some time in AFL as well. I just kind of reading the tea leaves a little bit. It looks like his trajectory is maybe a little bit faster than some of the other guys in this class. And, underlying power-wise, he's not that different from Jack Caglianone, who has crazy power. I think we've all heard it talked about. We've seen the highlights from Florida. We've seen some of the stuff from pro ball, but he's a much better hitter than Caglianone is. He has better bat-to-ball skills, which are actually pretty good for Jack. Much better swing decisions, and that's the big question with Jack. So I think when I'm looking at a player like this, I'm willing to take a chance on Kurtz. And once he's up, he could be a top 10, fantasy first baseman. I think he has that sort of ability and output. It's not going to hurt that he's playing in a AAA park. So we'll see how that goes. If they do end up in Vegas, the way that Vegas has played as a AAA park over the last 10 years, the ball's probably going to fly there, even if they have a humidor. So that could be another park that's, more or less mirrors what we saw at Coors Field and Chase before they added the humidor, just in terms of the offensive environment. The other one's another guy that I love. I was there sort of when the gospel was written at Chase DeLauder on the Cape. Remember sitting down, seeing an Orleans versus Chatham game. There's some big names in that game. One of them was Jace Jung, actually. He was kind of the focal point. And it was like, all right, who's this guy from James Madison who's got a really unusual swing, but hits the heck out of the ball, spits on anything that's right in the corners, is a really good center fielder. And then just throughout that summer, he just continued to impress, was the best player in the Cape Cod League that summer. The issue with him is he's just dealt with injuries. He dealt with injuries in his draft year at James Madison. He came into pro ball. I think he was held to under 60 games in his first full season. This year it was 39. He's always been productive when he's on the field. It's, like I said, a really unusual swing. It's like the most accentuated scissor kick in terms of, his back foot really turning in and kind of being a little wild, but he gets so much stability. He's so easily rotational, power to all fields, a plus runner, a guy that can play center field. He gets on base. He doesn't swing and miss. He doesn't strike out. If the opportunity's there, I'm kind of looking at Will Brennan on that, starting rotation and saying there's no reason that DeLauder, if healthy, can't push to the major leagues and potentially, push Brennan out of that right field spot where I think DeLauder could be outstanding. Just a matter of him staying healthy and that his feet, he doesn't have Bill Walton's feet. I mean, he's kind of at that point where it's like consistently, he's constantly injured. And, as somebody who's had some foot injuries, from athletics in the past, it's not fun to deal with, man. So hopefully he's fully recovered and can have a full healthy season, because I think he could really take off.
All right. My number 5 pick is a name that everybody may not be totally familiar with. Davison De Los Santos came over to the Marlins in the A.J. Puck trade from the Diamondbacks last year. And again, it's another opportunity story. As the Marlins went younger, they traded Jake Berger away. And by the time Berger left in the second half, he was really splitting time between first base and DH. And that's where I think Davison De Los Santos is probably going to fit. A quiz. Does anybody know that this guy was the minor league home run champion last year? 40 home runs, 120 RBI. So, that's a pretty impressive, set of numbers. Maximum exit velocity 116, which is no better than Berger. But, hard hit numbers, very good. So this is a guy, who, on the other hand, he's still 21 years old, but he does have that 40-man roster spot. And the 40-man roster spot, of course, very important coming out of camp. So, it's a question of whether David Los Santos will be on the team initially or whether he'll get a chance later on. But there isn't tons and tons of competition for him. So I think when he shows he's ready, he'll be there for the Marlins. Any other thoughts about this guy?
One of the highest chase rates in the minors, so he's pretty fascinating. He's about as aggressive as they get, but the power's there. I don't do comps very often, but I see like a statistical comp to like a Franmil Reyes type. Like when I'm looking at the data, Franmil Reyes ran into some 30 home run seasons and he was out of majors pretty quick. So Davidson's so young. I think he could improve that. The contact skills are a bit concerning. The chase is concerning, but there's no denying how good the power is.
Yeah, strikeout 28.4% in AAA. But I saw somebody do a comparison of his counting stats and advanced metrics and called him a Pete Alonso. I think that is a little too high a praise. But, I'm pretty happy with De Los Santos in the 5th round.
Yeah.
Yeah. If you're looking for power late in the draft, like cheap enough to go there, I think. So I'm going the polar opposite. I'm going boring with two guys here. Like talk about boring prospects, and I drafted Jacob Wilson and Nick York next. They're going to get plate appearances. Maybe they're not the flashiest, but I do think that when you're looking in a redraft league, if you're looking at prospects, like plate appearances are pretty important. Now, I understand right now it seems like Nick Gonzalez might be ahead of Nick York on the depth chart. I think Nick York's the better player at this point. I think that we see him playing consistently. And, York made a pretty substantial leap last year with some underlying data. He took a big jump power-wise, had a 105 mile-an-hour 9th percentile, which is a pretty good mark for somebody his size and that you kind of look at and you don't see power very often. He hit just 12 home runs, but he had 33 doubles as well. And he slashed 303, 385, 449. So obviously he was with Boston. They trade him to Pittsburgh for Quinn Priester, a deal that made sense for both parties, just given that Boston needed pitching prospects that were close and Pittsburgh needed bats. They're loaded with pitching prospects in their system. York also can steal you some bags. It's respectable contact skills. It's 79% last year, 86% in zone. So pretty good marks there. It's not major swing and miss against breakers. He handles all pitch types pretty well. So, I look at Nick York and I see somebody that could contribute and I think get to more sneaky power than you might think, just given the jump that we've seen from him. He's still 22 years old. So I think there's still plenty of positive development ahead for somebody who has taken such a leap. And Jacob Wilson, we know, is one of the best contact hitters in the minors. He's boring. He's not going to provide you much of any power. He's pretty hyper aggressive. I know everybody always talks about the contact rates, but he's actually really aggressive, chases out of the zone. Sometimes he's not making contact on great pitches because he's swinging at almost everything, but he's putting the bat on ball and he's getting on base, and that's what matters. I think he's got a career minor league average north of 400 and could be the only hitter to ever do that, like that played substantial time in the minors, which is kind of crazy. In last year, he had a 433 average in the minors with a 473 OBP. So it's just pretty stupid contact ability. You might not get a ton else, but he's going to play, and he benefits from the park in Sacramento for sure.
Well, I have to admit, I was going to take Wilson if you hadn't right before. So I scrambled a little bit and looked at the Tigers' third base situation, which we saw a lot of rumors this winter. Are they going to be in the hunt for Bregman or not? Would they ante that kind of money? Would they trade for Nolan Arenado? What would they do? Right now, it's Jace Young and Matt Vierling, I guess. And that's not a bad situation to be. Young's a good on-base guy, but he doesn't have the speed to take advantage of it, which is a little bit of a problem. Just has average power. Both walks and strikes out a lot, which, again, isn't a great combination, but has been more successful against right-handers and left-handers. So, a platoon situation might be a way for Jace Young to, make the roster starting in the season and staying with Detroit. They've got a lot of other guys they brought in, McKinstry, Eddie Ibanez. So it's not totally clear how they're going to how they're going to handle that mix of players in Detroit. But Chase Young showed enough when he came up, I think, that he's going to get significant time at some point with the Tigers this year, even if it's not opening day.
Yeah, and I was back on the board for a couple more picks here. I'm kind of staying with my plus to plus power hitter theme here. A couple of guys, and Bryce Eldridge and Elvis Martinez. Bryce Eldridge climbed all 4 levels of the minors last year, was drafted as a two-way guy, and was a legitimate pitching prospect. I think people miss that. Like, we were talking to him a little bit, the event that we throw before the Futures game when all the prospects come in. We have some sponsors like Louisville Slugger and Wilson Glove and Evo Shield that do some work with us. And we put on this big event. It's sort of like a welcoming event for all these guys. Then we get to kind of chat with them a little bit. Chatted with Bryce for a while, and he was kind of saying, hey, there's guys I was seeing in low A that, I know I'm a better pitcher than these guys. But they committed him to first base. I asked him about that. He is pretty athletic, has a big arm, said, was there any thought about having you get some run in the outfield? And he said, no. I mean, you look at the 40-man roster for my organization, there's just not a lot of talent at first base. Lamont Wade is sort of the guy that's listed there. Of course, something could happen if Alonso or someone like that signs. But ultimately, I think that there's opportunity there. They pushed him all the way up to AAA, played a lot of baseball last year, and then they sent him to AFL. He did look a little tired by the time he got to AFL. That being said, this is a guy that just came out of high school, played 116 games, hit 289, 372, 513. You look at the underlying data, 424 ex-Wobicon, 60% line drive plus fly ball rate, a 106.6 90th percentile. That's so outlier versus, what the typical benchmark is for that age. When you're talking about 19-year-olds, the average 90th percentile exit velocity in the minor leagues is 100 miles an hour. He's well above that. There's definitely some concerns in terms of spin. I think that he is more a guy that I would take in an NFBC, DC. I'm maybe taking him if I can get him in round 40, 41, sort of a bench stash, second half guy that I can plug in. He gets the call up. He's got power. It's not the best ballpark, obviously, for power hitters, but he will get some road games in Colorado and some other places. And he is one of those hitters that I think can really hit the ball out of any park, in the world. Other guy I took is Elvis Martinez. I've been sort of an Elvis Martinez truther for a few years now. I think people forget how young this guy still is. He just turned 23 in November. Got his first taste of the big leagues and immediately failed the PED test. So I guess that's kind of a concern, or maybe not. I don't know. I grew up in the steroid era. That stuff doesn't go away, right? You do a couple cycles, it sticks in the system. He's always had outlier power. The thing that we've seen from Martinez is the swing decisions have tremendously improved over the last 2 years and continue to tick up. The numbers that he put up at AAA over 74 games, 267, 346, 523 with 17 home runs. The underlying data in terms of, bat speed, he is, one of the fastest bats in the minor leagues. I'm just trying to pull up what the exact number is. Yeah, I mean, on our model, it's like top 12, and that includes some guys that have played in the majors. Like for extended periods of time, 423 ex-Wobicon, 107.5 90th percentile. Heart swing, this is the big one for me, 82%. He does not chase, and his in zone miss rate isn't bad. It's one of the reasons that despite sort of getting that label as like a 3 true outcome type of hitter, he really isn't. I mean, he's never had a strikeout rate above like 29% at any level. The one year that it was, he was a 20-year-old in New Hampshire where he hit 30 home runs over a full season. Had some batted ball luck with a 217 batting average on balls in play. But you saw tremendous growth and obviously made it up to AAA in 23. Had he not failed that test, he probably wouldn't be available on this list. And, the Blue Jays, I think at this point are like, they're grasping at straws, trying to stay competitive in that division. They're doing anything they can. And they finished second on enough players that there's probably some opportunity for him to come up and get some at bats. So I think he's kind of a sneaky target in terms of some redraft because he doesn't have a clear path to playing time, but certainly the bat I think is major league caliber. Where he ends up defensively is a bit of a question. He has some tools, but it's just really inconsistent. You can see him for 5 games and he doesn't make an error, and then you can see him for 2 and he makes 3. Like he's one of those kind of players.
All right, Brian, 20th pick.
Yeah, so continuing my theme of guys that we would have talked about last year even more positively than we are here after Lawler, Kierstead, young, is my next pick, Colson Montgomery, who is still the Chicago White Sox shortstop of the future. It's just a year later than when we thought. And there's no doubt Montgomery had a tough season in AAA. He was healthy. He was a positive. Downside, batted 214 with a 710 OPS. Now, they did send him down to the fall league briefly. Like those 11 games, something like that. And he hit well, 313 with 1167 OPS. So, at least he ended the negative season on a high note. And the general manager, Chris Getz, was quoted the other day as saying he expects Montgomery to be make his debut with the White Sox this season, no doubt about it. What we don't know, again, is whether it's going to be opening day. Brooks Baldwin is the projected shortstop right now, so I don't think that's a lot for Montgomery to push out of the way if he shows that he can hit consistently at AAA. I think he's going to need a couple of months there, to really get in the groove and show that he belongs, because when he does come up, he will be the starting guy in Chicago. Again, probably not in April, more like maybe June.
Yeah, heavily debated Colson earlier. Yeah, I think that everybody's completely out on him. I'm still in on him. He's dealt with some things. He had a weird injury last year that kind of just was nagging, and I think affected the performance.
He had a legitimate scar on his palm that went from here to here because he had changed the type of bats that he was using, and there was something weird where he switched back, I think, in terms of he might have switched to a bat handle, and it was or an axe handle, and it was kind of messing with his hand. So I talked to him for 20 minutes. It was hilarious. His agents were trying to pitch some other guy, and so they just left him there, and I felt bad. So so I was he's just sitting there, and I'm like, hey man, how's it going? So we chatted for a while, and I was kind of asking about, had a really, really articulate guy, really interesting conversation I actually had with him about the auto zones and how Charlotte was using the challenges. And he said that there's certain guys that were in the lineup. I don't go off a tangent here, but I think it's useful information. Yeah. There were actually guys in that lineup where the coach, manager was like, dude, you don't ever get the challenge when you're at the plate. They also don't let any pitchers challenge either. Any defensive challenges in terms of for the pitcher had to be made by the catcher. Just kind of an interesting conversation, but he did have this big scar that had just healed. And I kind of wonder how much that was hurting. It was on his bottom hand too. So, that can be a bit of an issue. So hopefully he's beyond that. He's a really talented player though.
Yeah. And he looked substantially better in the AFL in his short time there. So yeah. I think that's a big encouragement for me. Obviously he had a good AFL in 2023 as well. He was the Fall Stars game MVP, but I know the talent's still there with Montgomery. I'm not that worried about him, to be honest with you. I think he's going to play substantial time, because who else is going to play? As Brian said, that depth chart over there is not all that great, and Montgomery's extremely talented. So who knows? Maybe it is opening day, but yeah, it's probably a month or two into the season. I still think he's a really good pick, and yeah, I debated him earlier, but alas, I've got one more pick, and then it's the final round. So I have 4 picks left, and I went with Jacob Melton with the Houston Astros. Melton's interesting. It feels like that he flies under the radar a bit. This is a big boy, big center fielder, and whether he plays center or a corner spot long term, he's a good glove in the outfield, which helps his case. And he's pretty good at the plate as well. Go back to 2023. He played just 99 games, but he had 23 homers, stole 52 bags. And then last year, again, he missed some more time with injury, which that's a little bit concerning. But in 443 plate appearances, he had 15 homers and 31 stolen bases. So we are looking at somebody with good power speed combo. It's solid underlying metrics. I mean, the average and the 9th percentile EVs are really respectable, topped out at 114. So there's some pretty good juice there. And the contact rate's pretty solid. He's 76%, 84% end zone. So things that you like to see. Melton checks a lot of boxes. Again, you look at the contact against changeups. I found that pretty interesting, and off-speed pitches was pretty poor. So that was something just kind of noted to keep an eye on. But this Astros outfield is bad. Look at the projected lineup right now, and it's not good. They're the bottom 3 hitters in that order. It's Chas McCormick, Taylor Trammell, and Jake Myers. And if you don't believe that Jacob Melton can find a way into this lineup pretty soon, then I don't know what else to tell you, because that's not a good lineup for a contending team in the outfield. Melton does have the skills you want to see. He's 24. He's been in the league for several years now, drafted in 2022. He's got the experience. So I think Melton's just a kind of a well-rounded skill set that doesn't really get talked about all that much. Now, like, he was their number one prospect for me prior to Cam Smith coming over, but now Smith is taking that spot. But Melton's ready. I wouldn't be shocked to see him up pretty soon. And then kind of took a upside dart here at the end, another 2024 draftee in Jack Caglione. He's someone that, there's immense power. We talked about it with Kurtz. Him and Kurtz go toe to toe with like the best power in the draft. And Jack, has put up some absurd exit velocities. I think he hit 122 in college last year with metal, but nonetheless. And he put up some pretty big moonshots in the AFL with a wood too. I mean, there's no denying the power. Everybody knocks the contact skills, which is kind of interesting because it's not the contact skills that are an issue. It's just the hyper aggressive chase out of the zone. Jack actually makes pretty respectable contact. I mean, in college last year, he ran end zone contact rate north of 90%. So that helps negate a little bit of the chase issue, but we are looking at a sample of 2023 college, 2024 college, 2024 pro ball, and even most of the AFL where he chased at a 40% clip. So pretty high chase rate, and you wonder how that affects him. Now, if you split the AFL in half, this is kind of interesting. First half of the AFL chase rate was north of 40%. Second half of the AFL, it dipped down to like 32%. It's the AFL, and it was 3 weeks, so I'm certainly skeptical, but it's something I'm just keeping an eye on and saying like, okay, maybe there's some improvements we can see. Jack, non-roster invitee to spring training. Obviously, I don't think he breaks camp, but there's nobody really blocking him in KC for plate appearance. I know Vinny Pasquantino's over there, but they can kind of coexist, I think, with the bat being as good as it is for both of those guys. So if you're looking for power, like in the last round of a DC, like NFBC draft and hold, like Jack's kind of the shot to take. I think that there's a chance that he gets up this year. There's also a chance that he struggles a bit and doesn't get up. If he's performing, I think they get a little aggressive with him, and we could see him down the stretch. So went with Jack with my last pick. Brian and Geoff both have one more pick. Brian, who you got?
Well, I couldn't go through the whole thing without picking the Cardinals guy. Everybody out there would be disappointed if I didn't. Here's a guy, when we're talking about the AFL, Thomas Sajaci, who hit very, very well in the AFL. Hit 391, 524 OBP. So was, able to draw walks. And that was important for Thomas Sajaci, who had joined the Cardinals the year before from Texas in the Jordan Montgomery trade. He said that he was, after trying to be more selective, Sajaci's big deal is, be aggressive. But he also struck out 23% and only walked about 6% during the course of the year. So to see Sajaci improve in the fall league was great because he had hit 20 doubles, 20 home runs in AAA and got the chance to come up with St. Louis in September. Really didn't do all that much. The interesting thing with Sajaci, who's a second baseman by name, by history, the Cardinals had him play a lot of shortstop in AAA, and it's not because they think that he's going to come and displace Mason Wynn. Let's face it, that's not going to happen. But they're trying to diversify Sajaci, who could also play a little third, although he doesn't really have a left side arm. It's going to be interesting to see. I think Sajaci's opportunity with St. Louis was improved, of course, when they let Brandon Crawford go because he was the sort of the backup shortstop that was on the bench. So Sajaci could still make the team as a reserve, but this whole question about Nolan Arenado, is he in or is he not? And then, of course, that affects Nolan Gorman. It affects Brendan Donovan. So in a world where there was greater opportunity, Sajaci could compete for the second base job. I think right now, Brendan Donovan would be the guy, he or Gorman would be the guy at second base, and that means Sajaci's either a reserve or back in AAA. But I think, again, Sajaci would move up my draft list if Nolan Arenado was traded, which I still think is a chance that could happen. Of course, everybody's kind of waiting to see what happens with Bregman, and I think the Cardinals are in a position where they want to try to go to the underbidders and see if they can still get a deal done to get Nolan Arenado out of St. Louis. But I think Sajaci will have a chance to play some this year. I don't know if it's going to be more than 200, 250 plate appearances, but as a last-round guy, I took a flyer on him.
Yeah, and I think you look at Donovan's situation, a guy that played a lot of outfield last year, even late in the year when Sajaci was up. So, depending on what happens with Jordan Walker, if the changes that he's claimed that he's made are holding true and he's hitting the ball in the air consistently, which is the big question, and that the defense is good enough for him to play out there every day, there could be a situation where that doesn't come to fruition. There's a lot of things that need to happen. And maybe Donovan ends up back in the outfield and we see Sajaci as the second baseman. I don't think it's totally out of the realm of possibility.
That's right. And just a sidebar on that, I watched Jordan Walker take his first outside batting practice the other day against Coach Pitch. And he was definitely elevating the ball, but there were a lot more pop-ups than I expected as well. So it was sort of a mixed bag for me. And, let's face it, we're talking about the end of January. So he's got a little bit of time. But physically, he looks like an NFL linebacker, but that doesn't really do anything. Except
maybe a tight end. I mean, the dude is huge.
Yeah.
He's a big boy.
Yeah. So, but that doesn't really help the front of the baseball, other than the front of the baseball card. And of course, we care about the bat. So.
Exactly. Well, with Mr. Irrelevant, the last pick in our rookie draft, I think this is a bit of a sleeper and probably a target for me. Like I said, I like to play DCs. It's probably the format in terms of redraft that I enjoy the most, the NFBC format that I enjoy the most. And I think some of it is knowing the rosters. That's a big part of my job, and knowing the 40-man rosters and the depth in each organization. Agustin Ramirez is really interesting to me. He was acquired in the Jazz Chisholm deal last year. There's some questions about the catching. He still caught 72 games last year. So a majority of his games were behind the plate. I think there's enough skills there that, we've seen Gary Sanchez, we've seen Wilson Contreras, these bat first sort of catchers come up. I think it's very similar in that sense. Hit tool's really, really good. 16.3% in zone miss with a 107.9 for 90th percentile exit velocity. The max last year was just under 116. It was 115.8. Little bit of ground ball heavy, but I think you'll take that with sort of the trade-off of pretty decent swing decisions, above average contact, plus power, really good bat speed. Then I look at the Marlins catching situation. You have Nick Fortes and you have Liam Hicks, who is a Rule 5 draft pick that I have major question marks about sticking it out through camp. Ramirez is already on the 40-man roster, has already burned an option, I believe, last year with the Yankees when he was initially added. He's a guy that with an impressive camp could really break camp with the team. It wouldn't shock me that, if we redid this draft 2 weeks before the season, if he does have a really good spring training, we're hearing stuff that the catching is at a point, it wouldn't shock me that Liam Hicks ends up getting returned to the Tigers and Ramirez ends up breaking camp with the team. Can play a little bit of first base as well. So could maybe factor into, that positional battle. Whether, the DH battle, whether it's, Davis and De Los Santos, who was taken earlier, does have some skills that are maybe a little bit better, doesn't have sort of the ability to elevate that hard contact that De Los Santos does, but does bring some other things to the table that I do think are really good. So that's the reason I went with Ramirez. I think that he might be a pretty decent sleeper pick this year in redraft.